Venture into the extraordinary with Paranormal M. Our channel is a sanctuary for those intrigued by the unexplained. Subscribe and enable notifications to stay up to date with our latest videos and immerse yourself in a world of the paranormal. Actual thing that happened to me today. Yesterday, I met up with 3 friends in my countryside school arbor. We talked a bit and shit, and when I had to go home at 10 p.m., while they stayed and were telling scary stories to each other. White van stories, UFO, and men in suits. Later on at 12 a.m., they went home. 2 of my friends at the same direction. The streetlights go off at 11 p.m. As they were going home through a small road going through our small village, a single one-lane road with houses on each side, they stumbled upon one of the few old wooden abandoned houses with a connection to big local fields. They saw odd candle-like lights coming from behind the house. They got spooked, of course, due to scary stories. No lights, and of course, the weird ritual-like lighting from behind the house. Next day, my parents let me stay for an hour longer. So we met up and just chit-chatted. At some point, near 10 p.m., where it was pretty dark, we hear a very creepy, surreal noise that sounded either like some monster, an old barn door closing, or someone crashing a car. We ignored it, and we just mind our own business. So later on, near 11 p.m., we head to the said house for the excitement and to see those lights again. This time, they were absent. However, we heard weird noises from inside that sounded like hitting a bag of concrete or beating the sheets. We get spooked, but I decided to take some pictures because why not? At some point, we hear something in the grass, so we ran off. We came back a few minutes ago, just to not hear anything at all this time. We were wondering what the hell was that after a minute of snooping around. We heard some door opening in this shack. We got so scared shitless that we just went back home. I got information from a friend's long-dead grandma that the house is haunted. I checked the photos, and one of them got a really creepy red hue to it. I swear to my life that I never edited those photos. I'd love to share the photos, but the sub doesn't allow external links. I think I'm having a bad paranormal experience in my in-laws' home. I, an 18-year-old female, am currently alone in my in-laws' home. I experience paranormal things whenever they and my boyfriend are asleep or gone at work at night, and it's only gotten worse. I've always been around the paranormal, my whole life. I've been followed by a little girl I call Izzy. She's done me no harm, and she's really sweet. She's been around me since I was 2 years old. Ever since I got with my boyfriend, an 18-year-old male, I've experienced more paranormal stuff than before in his home. It started off normal, seeing things, being touched, hearing things that were kind of normal for me. I've been living in his parents' house for a year now, and I'm pretty familiar with the spirits, at least the spirits that are in that house. Another little girl, a saloon worker, and a little man with a long pointed nose. Recently I noticed something else out of the ordinary. Something I've never seen before, and it kind of freaks me out. It only happens when I do the dishes at any time of the day. A skin-colored, tall, faceless man like Slender Man, but no clothes and peach-colored. He's so tall and he has an arch to his back, so his proper height to not really touch the ceiling. He watches me do the dishes around the corner where the living room and the kitchen connect. It's creepy, and when I turn back to notice him, he backs away into the living room where I can't see him and disappears. I can never get a picture of him since my hands are always in the soapy water and my phone is never on me. Recently, it's only gotten worse. He tries to get closer to me. I don't like him. He scares me more than anything else I've ever seen. I can't use sage. It burns my nose to the point that I get a nosebleed and I get itchy all over. I don't know what to do. He scares me. I'm always alone throughout the week, especially at night on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. When everyone is home and awake at night, there's nothing I can do, and I'm scared he'll hurt me. He can't get me if I'm in mine and my boyfriend's bedroom. The faceless man won't go past the kitchen for some reason, which is good for me because our bedroom is in the back of the house next to the kitchen. I don't know what else to do. I'm alone and scared and no one is home but me, the dogs, cats, and bunnies. My true story from 1 year ago, somewhere in Wales. My first post to this group, and I'm telling my experience from around 1 year ago, which is one of only a handful of things that I've experienced that I cannot explain. This isn't as exciting as the other stories here, and I'm keeping location details out of it, though maybe someone will be able to guess. I was staying with family in an old renovated stone cottage that was hundreds of years old, built on the vast grounds of a monastery that was destroyed during the dissolution by Henry VIII. The cottage was nestled on the edge of these grounds, with a few more modern holiday homes, at the foot of a great hill where an old ruined castle stands guard overlooking the landscape. It was a beautiful scenic place with walking trails right up to the doorstep. The house had been in the family for 80 years, and we stayed there so I could help with the renovation during the visit. It's their second house, and is normally Airbnb'd, so this was our first and last stay here at this cottage. The spookiness began on the first night. I shared a room with my brother, as there is a lot of us staying there, and he went to bed early. I went to bed around midnight. Trying to fall asleep, I heard heavy boots. Boot footsteps up in the loft and attic. The boot steps would walk above my head to the far end of the house, stop for 10 minutes, then walk back above my head again to the other end. This pattern would repeat for, it seems like hours. This was a very distinct pattern, far too heavy to be any animal walking around. The pacing was deliberate, the pause between each step long enough to suggest slow, wide strides. This occurred every night we were there, and my brother heard it too. I did try to record the sound, but it didn't come out very well. I would wake up in the middle of the night and it would still be there, walking back and forth. After 2 nights of this, I casually asked Granddad if this house had a loft. It did, inaccessible hatch over the stairs that would require a long ladder to reach. And his first response to that casual question was, "Why? Did you hear something?" I said yes, and explained what we had heard. He got a bit defensive and just said that it was animals and rats up there. No small rodent-type animal could make the noises that I was hearing. The final story from this trip that will be quick, as it may have an explanation. On the final night, there were footsteps crunching on the stones out in the front of the cottage, around 11 p.m. This was a bit odd, so I checked out the window with a limited view and saw no one and no torchlight either. The The footsteps faded away in the distance. This could be explained as someone on a walking trail late at night and just took a wrong turn and ended up outside our cottage. In the dark, without a torch, bit strange. I saw my sister's doppelganger. So when I was little, around 10, my mom wanted to take my little sister, let's call them Kate, Jane, and Amber, to the playground in front of our flat. But me thinking I was too old to play in the playground anymore, decided to stay home alone. After a couple of hours, I get a call from my mom telling me that Jane has to go to the bathroom, and if I hear the doorbell ring, to open the door for her because she forgot her keys. I told her that I'm going to wait in front of the door so I don't leave my sister waiting on for too long. A few minutes later, I hear the doorbell ring, so I stand up and go to the door and start unlocking it. But something in my gut told me to look through the peephole. When I looked through it, I saw that Jane and Kate were standing in front of the door, and Kate was hiding her face and her long brown hair, like the girl in the Ring movie. So I got a little bit confused because my mother told me that only Jane is coming, but I brushed it off, and while I was unlocking the door, I kept looking through the peephole, and Kate was just creepily standing there with her hair hiding her face. When I reached the final lock, we have 3 locks on the door, and start unlocking it, I just see Kate start sprinting inhumanly fast down the stairs. Me being worried about my sister, I quickly unlocked the door and started asking Jane, where did Kate go? And why did she run like that down the stairs? She looked at me with a confused look on her face and told me that Kate was in the playground playing with her friends, and she never came up with her. After what she said, I told her that this isn't funny and to stop lying, but she just told me that she really needs to use the bathroom and pushed me out of her way. I then quickly ran to my phone and called my mom, asking her where Kate is, and she calmly answered that Kate's playing with her friends in the playground. My heart dropped after hearing what my mother said, because the girl in the front of the door was wearing the exact same clothes as her and had the same body structure and hair. So if Kate was playing outside with her friends, then who did I see at the front door? After that, for a couple of days, I barely slept and I was scared to stay alone in the apartment. And years later, I'm still confused and wondering about what I saw that day. My blanket just folded itself. I'm currently typing this exact text 3 to 5 minutes after this just happened, and I'm really fucking confused. At the moment, I'm on a trip with my father to India, in which we're seeing his side of the family. My mom, unfortunately, couldn't come due to work reasons, and my brother is busy with college. After eating breakfast, I went back to the room that my father and I are staying in and sat on the bed for a minute or two. The blanket remained in the same spot it did when I got up 2 hours ago. I then got up to close the door, but I hesitated for some reason, and I decided to grab my toothbrush to brush my teeth with. But then I thought, fuck it, I'm too lazy for that shit. When I turned toward the bed, the blanket was neatly folded up on the edge of the bed. I thought, what the hell? It was spread out just a second ago. I then sat on the bed confused for a minute and kept glancing at the blanket. I then opened my phone, found this subreddit, and I'm currently typing this just after this experience happened. I'm sure it's nothing, and I might just be imagining things. But this is really terrifying. I've never had something like this happen to me before. When I was 7 years old, I saw a black figure in my doorway with a brimmed hat. What did I encounter? It was a normal day. I was playing with my dog outside named Harley. She was an English bulldog that was as friendly could be. My aunt called me in for bed. I was sad because I was having fun with my dog playing tug of war. I went inside and laid down in my bed. My uncle came to my room. He gave me a hug and tucked me in. At least an hour later, I put the Goofy movie into my VHS player, and all of a sudden I had a really weird feeling. Not like I was being watched or like I was dreaming. It was a feeling of familiarity, like I was in the presence of someone I knew. I didn't feel scared at all. I looked up, and there he was, at least 6 feet, 4 to 6 feet 6, wearing a long trench coat that went all the way to the ground and a broad-brimmed hat. Whatever I was seeing was completely black, darker than the dark room that I was in, and completely featureless. When I saw it, I wasn't scared or paralyzed. I was more curious, and I honestly felt safe and like it was friendly. So I said, "Hello?" and snapped my fingers just to make sure I was awake. I looked at him for at least 10 minutes before I waved at him. As soon as I wave at him, he's gone just as fast as he appeared. I lay in bed, completely stunned by what was happening. I went back to watch the Goofy movie, and I had an entirely normal night after that. Nothing else was strange or out of the ordinary. The weirdest thing was that I wasn't scared by the shadow figure. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calmness and curiosity, as if I had encountered a long-lost friend. It was as if the presence of the shadow figure had somehow reassured me, rather than instilling fear. I really have no idea what this thing was. It was very similar to the description of the Hat Man, but I could tell I wasn't being threatened by his presence. The shadow figure seemed to be observing me from a distance, almost as if it were studying my every move. The encounter with the shadow figure left me with a lingering sense of curiosity. It's as if that brief interaction held a hidden meaning or purpose that I may never fully comprehend. Despite not seeing him again, the memory of that enigmatic presence continues to puzzle and fascinate me. The things that haunt me. My family on my father's side has always been a bit more in tune with the taboo. So I grew up in a very open family when it comes to unexplainable things. Here are some tales of the things that have haunted my 25 years on this planet. I was a very odd child. I always liked weird things and the unknown. So I dabbled like a moron. And as we all know, when you go looking, something comes looking for you. I was about 13 years old, living in an apartment building with my mother and stepfather. I've always had insomnia, and one evening I was tossing and turning when suddenly I felt dread. I was absolutely terrified. I had no lights on as I was trying to fall asleep. In this bedroom, I had double sliding mirrors facing my bed. I didn't know any better. Finally, I summoned up the courage to open my eyes and roll over, and when I did, I stopped breathing. Standing next to my bed, facing the wall and looking outside, was a girl, roughly the same age, with long black hair and soft pink polka-dotted nightgown. Just staring at the wall, not moving, not breathing. I stared at her for what felt like hours but was probably just moments, and then I hid underneath my covers. It was probably about 15 minutes before the dread passed. and when I finally opened my eyes and peeked again, she was gone. This was the first and last time I ever saw her. I would always get home first, as my mom and stepdad are police officers, so I was always alone. The apartment sometimes would just feel so heavy. My computer desk faced a wall, and my back would be towards all the doors. These doors would creak and move all the time, which was whatever, but one day I was on my webcam and I looked, and in the door to my parents' room, there was a black mass standing there, just existing. I, of course, panicked and looked behind me to find nothing. Things like this continued to happen to me throughout living there. Fast forward 2 years, I'm now living at my stepmother's home. I was taking care of her during her stage 5 breast cancer, so I'd often be home alone while she was in the hospital undergoing treatment. One day I'm sitting in the living room watching TV, and from the corner of my eye, I see roughly 4 people in my yard walking up to my porch. I was weirded out as we live in the middle of nowhere, but my stepmom has so many friends that it wouldn't have been too strange for somebody to come. I wait and wait for a knock. Nothing. So I go open the door, and nothing. No one is there. I go and look around the property and the gate, and no one's there either. I ignored this and went on about my days. Maybe a month or so later, though, I'm downstairs again with Sky, our beautiful massive GSD, just watching TV. And suddenly we hear a slam from upstairs. It sounded like someone fell, got up, then fell again. I was there alone with just the dog, but the dog was with me. It took me a good 30 minutes to go upstairs and look. I was scared, and Sky was scared. I wasn't going to go up there without her, and she was refusing to go up there at first. I checked my stepmom's room, and everything was normal. So I go about checking all the rooms. I finally get to my room, and it's destroyed. My clothes were everywhere. My bed was disheveled, and a dog kennel I had in there had the door ripped off, and it was sat neatly next to the kennel itself. Needless to say, Sky and I slept downstairs. After that incident, things died down, and I'd mainly just see shadows from my eyes darting around and shadow people walking with me. At 15 to 16 years old, I got real into the supernatural. So I started opening my mind, trying to contact things and see what all was out there. This was fine and dandy, nothing too odd for a good while. Just more of the same shadow people, doors slamming behind me, my iPod randomly taking photos, things like that. Well, around this time, I met my first boyfriend. Somehow I was allowed to stay at this boyfriend's home with him and his parents on weekends and such. My boyfriend and his brother were huge into paranormal stuff. His brother dabbled in some very dark and wicked things. One night, my boyfriend, his brother, and I are at the house alone, just talking and hanging out. And I'm looking outside, and all of a sudden, a broom just gets yeeted across the porch. I stop and say, "What the fuck was that?" Of course, they're giddy and excited, but I wasn't. I had an odd feeling. Later that night, we had gone over to a friend's house who lived up the street, and we drank and smoked and did all the teenager bullshit. As we were walking home, I see something in the distance. It's right out front of my boyfriend's house. This thing looked like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. I freak out and shout, "What in the fuck is that?" and point. This creature-like thing squat walked in front of my boyfriend's car and didn't come back out. I was petrified. I didn't want to walk past the car, but I also was afraid to let him go ahead and me become engulfed by the forest and darkness that we were walking in. We made it past the car, and nothing. At this point, I'm done. I'm scared, and I want to go sleep. My boyfriend didn't want to sleep, so he and his brother went outside to smoke and be boys. After maybe 2 hours later, I hear my boyfriend say my name. Why are the lights out? I'm lost. Then a moment later, I heard him say, "Open the door, it's dark out here." I got up from bed, went to open the door, and froze. I froze my hand inches from the doorknob. Something told me, no, don't do it, do not open that door. So I did what anyone would do and hid underneath the blankets crying. Another hour passes, and my boyfriend finally comes in. I asked him, why did he ask me to open the door? And was he high? Did he really get lost in his own home? He looked at me like I had 3 heads and told me, I've been outside since I first came in. That was the most significant thing that happened in that home. The energy was focused in the kitchen as I'd hear someone say, "Help," from the pantry. Every time I ignored it. More years passed, and I decided enough was enough, so I closed my mind off. This worked for a while until I moved to another state. I moved in with my sister, and everything was okay for a week or 2. But one morning, while I was getting ready for work, I heard a crash coming from my sister's room. I was alone again. I went into her room to see what it was, and she had a clock on the floor she was fixing. It was leaning up against the wall. No batteries, one hand missing. The remaining hand was violently spinning. At this point, I'm in my 20s and have 0 fucks left, so I slam her door and go back to my business. Then one day she opens up to me about weird things happening around the house. So I suggest that we set up cameras, and man, it did not disappoint. We caught a hand appearing and disappearing on her couch, as if it was changing the TV channel. Then we caught the couch being hit, the computer flashing on, then immediately shutting off, and something falling in the laundry room. This activity eventually calmed down as I told her that we need to stop and do something about it. Another year passes, and woohoo, I got my first house. Everything seemed great, no bad vibes or anything. For the first few months of living there, anyway. Then one day I'm sitting in my living room and hear voices in my basement. I said no, I didn't check. So instead I got a security system and installed on all the doors and windows, with cameras watching the outside. While I was at work one day, I got an influx of alerts. Garage door open, garage door shut, master bedroom window open, pool door open. I got home so damn fast, I didn't call the police. I didn't want them in my home without me there since I have guard dogs. I cleared the house, everything was fine, and no one was there. I'm shaken, but eventually I forget about it. Until a few days later, the same thing happens. I did the same thing, rushed home, checked everything, and cleared the house. So then I had the terrifying thought, what if I have a voyeur? So I bought cameras and installed them in every room. I didn't see a single thing. The sensors still went off, so I called the company, and they checked if something was wrong. Nope, everything was working just fine. Everything calms down eventually. Until one day, while I'm trimming my dog's nails, I hear thundering footsteps rushing toward me from behind. I didn't have time to react before I felt a big chill on my neck. I looked scared as if I'm about to be murdered, but then there was nothing there. So I got up, told whatever it was to fuck off, and slammed my door. A few nights later, I'm watching TV in the living room, and in my kitchen I see a black mass peeking around a good foot above my cabinets. When I fully look, there's nothing there. So we did a song and dance for this, and for a good while, and it had gotten to the point where I just got used to it. I didn't have bad vibes, so I just ignored it. Then I had to leave my home for about 2 weeks. When I came back, all of my pictures had been knocked off the walls, even in the dining room. If I hadn't had unlocked my doors, I would have thought it was just maybe a break-in. So I just simply apologized to whatever was here, and that I was sorry I left, but I had to. But I'm home now. Everything was good for a while, until one night I was woken up. I'm in pure terror. Something is in my room, and I can feel it. It's a horrific energy. I didn't dare look. I kept my eyes closed. That was maybe a month or so ago now. Ask Reddit. I attended a boarding school in Nigeria, and during my years, and even up until now, the school was haunted. There's several creepy experiences I've encountered, not only me, but like almost all the students in the school. I'll only share a recurring experience among several other experiences. My school is somewhat in the woods in a small village, and I normally read at night, midnight hours of 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. In the hostel, there are times when I was the only one who wakes up to read. Not always, but a majority of the time. So one day I woke up and I was exhausted from reading and wanted to take a break. I decided to take a little walk around the hostel. Everywhere was dark, no lights, but I had a torch. I decided to go out of the hostel. The hostel gate wasn't locked. And just by the gate, I saw someone in boxers walk through the gate on the outside. I hurriedly went out to see if I'll see anyone, of course with my torch, but I did not. I thought I was hallucinating, so I went back to reading. On a different occasion, this time, the same thing happened, and still I couldn't find the person. I was fully convinced it was a ghost. We experience ghosts occasionally in the school, and now I realized I wasn't hallucinating. The third time I wasn't the only one awake, so they could read, and we were too. So I took a break and the same thing happened. I tried to see if I could see that person, but no, I didn't see anyone. Now I was scared. I closed the gate and ran into the hostel. I told the other guy who was awake and we closed the door. We both slept out of fear. This thing happened around 2 a.m. at midnight. Until this day, I don't know who or what that person is. I couldn't figure out before leaving the school. I left in 2018, so it's very recent. I turned down a street in my town that didn't exist. Growing up in a Tennessee town with a population of around 27,000 in the late 1990s, I had acquired a few years of driving experience while still attending high school. One day, my friend and I decided to take a leisurely drive, a common pastime at the time due to the affordable gasoline prices. During our excursion, I made a turn into a neighboring street that was unlike any other area in town. It felt as if we had been transported to Mexico. Each house displayed a distinctive Mexican style, and numerous Latino individuals were outside their residences, staring us down as we drove by. The The striking contrast in architectural styles compared to the Tennessee surrounding areas left both me and my friend bewildered, prompting us to ask, what the hell just happened? We circled back around the neighborhood to find the street again. For the life of me, we couldn't find it. We spent a considerable amount of time driving around, retracing our paths repeatedly. Instead of the street we remembered, there was now an open field occupying the spot where we had just made the turn. Determined to find it, we visited the local library and the city offices in search of current and historical maps of our area. We found maps, but we found no street where we remembered turning. I'll always remember the eerie feeling of being stared at like we didn't belong, and how that feeling was amplified when the street seemingly vanished. I remember it vividly, even after 15 years. I was about 9 years old, almost 10 at the time. I was at my family home, located in a hilly area, enjoying summer vacation. Let me describe the home first. It's a very old establishment, going back more than 300 years, and a big temple open for public inside. Now, almost every room and the temple is at the top part of the hill, and only 3 things at the bottom, which is about 100 or 120 steps down. My grandfather's room, who's a monk, his guru, his teacher's burial site, and a duplex. It tends to get very, very hot in that region, and only one room in that duplex had an air conditioner, which no one in my family, big joint family, used. I told my dad that I would sleep there, as it was very hot and I wanted to sleep in an AC room. My dad agreed, and I went there to sleep. Now, this duplex and my grandfather's room is separated by a porch covered with smooth pebbles, and the duplex rested between my grandfather's room and the burial site. I was really a heavy sleeper back then, but I somehow woke up in the middle of the night. Don't know at what time, as I didn't have a phone and no clock was in the room. But I heard someone entering the porch, and I could clearly see the footprints being made on the pebbles, but I couldn't see anyone. It slowly reached my grandfather's door and knocked on it. My grandfather just said, "Not now, it is nighttime, I'm sleeping." The footsteps retracted to a wooden swing in the porch and stopped there. I saw that wooden swing moving for about 15 to 20 minutes before I fell asleep. I wasn't scared at all of this incident. But in the morning, I just told my dad that I won't be sleeping there. He understood and didn't pry. I think this was kind of an open secret in our family, but no one talked about it openly. I still remember this incident vividly and still not scared of this incident after processing it properly. I pretty much know what it was, but I would still love to hear your opinions. A voice saved my life. I was with my mother hiking waterfalls, and being a bit younger, while she was walking the trail, I was enjoying climbing the rocks and sliding down to meet up with her. During my little parkour adventure, I jumped and slid down most of the trail, but I came up next to one and did the same thing I'd been doing all day, but this time when I slid down, unknowingly, it was a huge drop, had to be around 100 foot plus onto rocks. When I started to slide down, this voice seemed to come from outside of me, not the usual internal dialogue, loud and very demanding. I heard, "Grab onto that branch." So I did instinctively. As I did, my feet just dangled over the edge, and I was able to climb back up. When we reached the bottom, I looked up at this huge mountain of rocks, and I can see the dirt marks from where I was, inches from death. Never told my mother. I just gazed in disbelief at the height and what just happened. Still, almost a decade later, it puzzles me at how lucky I was that the voice was there and the branch being there, as well as it's not just snapping when I grabbed it. Only thing I can think of is a guardian angel, cliche as it sounds. It amazes me, the will of instinct. Ask Reddit. Still, to this day, I don't know what to make of this incident that occurred in my house about 8 years ago. I live in a very quiet and peaceful neighborhood on a dead end. At the time, my aunt lived 2 houses down from my family and was having some issues with her kitchen sink. My father is very handy and can fix or build just about anything. So he agreed to go check it out. My mother and brother were out, but I was about 16 years old at the time and was well accustomed to staying home by myself. It was broad daylight and during the summer. However, my father still said that he would check on me from time to time. My father went to go fix my aunt's sink as he promised. He did walk back home from time to check if I was all right. My room is on the 2nd floor of our house, in the left-hand corner. In order for me to see who comes into the house, I have to exit my room and peer down the staircase, which is directly in front of our front door. This is not far. The staircase is about 6 feet from my bedroom door, and every time my father walked in to check on me, I walked out of my room to see him and speak to him from the top of the stairs. About 1 hour after the last check-in my father did with me, I heard our front door open. Our front door is very old, and it has chimes on it. You can hear it open from any part of the house. As soon as my father opened the door, he called out to me and began asking me if I was okay and if I was hungry. As I was conversing with him, I started to walk toward my open bedroom door so I could go out into the landing and talk to him easier. But as I was walking, my phone rang. I turned around and walked back to my bed to pick it up, and the caller ID said, "Daddy." I will admit, upon seeing the caller ID, I was a little perplexed. But then I figured my father might have butt-dialed me. He recently had gotten a new phone, and the touchscreen was activated by other objects, not just finger pads. I yelled downstairs, "Daddy, you're calling me?" And I decided to pick up the phone anyway. I, for no reason at all, jokingly answered, "Hello." I did not expect to hear my father on the other side. "Hey, I'm finishing up over here soon." I fell deathly silent. I hear my father continue to speak to me on the phone, but I'm also hearing my father, the same exact voice, speak to me from downstairs in the living room. I whispered into my phone, "Daddy, where are you?" And he proceeds to tell me that he's at my aunt's house, and that I already knew that. I would also like to add that on the phone in the background, I can hear my aunt and her children. My father then asks me if I'm hungry. I'm now shaking uncontrollably, and in the background I hear our front door open and close. I'm sweating. My mind was working a mile a minute to understand what the hell was going on, while also being in a state of immense fear. I tell my father something along the lines of cutting it out, and that he just asked me that because he was literally just walking out of the front door. My father told me that the last time he came back was around 1 p.m., and for me to tell him what I was talking about. I have 15 steps in my house. It took me about 2 leaps to get down all of them, I ran out of my house with no shoes on. I don't even remember if I closed her front door. I ran to my aunt's house completely shaken and in tears, unable to explain what just happened. I still try not to think about it. About 10 years ago, I had a baseball-sized lump on my neck, and after 2 small biopsies, they were still unable to diagnose, and I was sent in for a 3rd biopsy. The procedure is called a VATS, and they made an incision between my ribs to feed in a robot arm that would root around in my chest with a camera and take samples of various lymph nodes. To give the arm more space, they collapsed my right lung and put in a chest tube. I didn't have any idea how painful that part of the procedure was going to be. The chest tube is basically just a plastic tube stuck into the incision, also between ribs, directly into the lung to keep it collapsed. Every breath with one of those inside you is enormously painful. It was only an overnight stay after the procedure, and knowing that it would be painful, they gave me an IV drip of Dilaudid. I was still in white-knuckle pain all night, so I couldn't even imagine without the medicine. It was a 2-bedroom, and I had it to myself for a few hours after I awoke from the anesthesia. And I was to get no further sleep that night. As the day fell into evening, and the room was shaded in the violet of an impending winter's evening, the door opened, and a man was escorted into the room by a nurse and a police officer. With no introductions made, or even a glance in my direction, they left us alone. The man appeared to be at least in his 50s, with long gray matted hair and wearing a tattered Vietnam-era military field jacket and dirty stone-washed jeans. The searing white-hot pain tearing through my right side had made me hyper-aware and had stolen my breath and had rendered me unable to speak. The man paced for hours, mumbling to himself angrily. No one had even bothered to pull the curtain between us. Every hour or so, an alarm on my IV machine would go off and would blare until a nurse came in to punch in a key sequence. As the evening wore on and the staff dwindled, the machine's alarm sequences became longer in duration. It became maddening to both myself and my fellow wanderer, let's call him. His pacing became more frantic as his ranting became angrier and he dug his fingers through his hair. My machine's been beeping for the better part of an hour, and I had been spamming the nurse call button for its entirety. Even the smallest movement of my thumb hitting the button caused burning electrical fire down the entire side of my body. Every muscle from my head to my toe was stiff and tensed for the entirety of the evening, and the muscle cramping seemed at the time to be the only pain that the IV was keeping at bay. I was unable to move or speak. As his pacing continued to intensify and my alarm continued to unrepentantly blare, he began to cast glances my direction between muffled curses. I added sheer panic to the list of the plethora of post-op symptoms. Knowing that it made no difference, I pressed the nurse call button over and over with increasing ferocity to no avail. He edged closer with his hands on top of his head, pulling his mats back tightly along with his eyelids and lips. He stood at the foot of my bed, analyzing my situation. His head tilted as he saw the chest tube, whether through recognition or curiosity. His eyes tracked down my arm to the IV, and up the tubes to the screeching machine. He lunged at the locked box which had held my pain medicine, and frantically pushing buttons as he shook it and sputtered. He growled, his eyes wide and spittle clung to his chin. His gray matted hair was wild. He grabbed my hand and I twisted it so the IV was pinned against the bed. I gasped for breath as my heart thudded against my sternum. He again grabbed the machine, shaking it violently, and shouted again and again, "Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it!" Spraying the interface with saliva, he grabbed the power cable and tugged, but it remained locked to the wall. He then got on the floor, tracing the power cable underneath the bed and to the wall where it was clamped. In a pure fight-or-flight burst of adrenaline, it took every fiber of my being to sit upright and shout in my loudest breathy gasp I could summon from my depths. I shouted, "No!" From beneath my bed, the man twisted and banged his head against the support structure, cursing for the alarm to stop. The door opened, flooding the room with light, and a large middle-aged nurse appeared in the doorway. Our panicked eyes locked, and she vanished in an instant. The man was now grunting from beneath me, the wall thudding as he yanked down the power cable with every tremendous beat of my heart. A police officer rushed into the room, grabbed his ankle, and dragged him out, his skin squeaking across the slick linoleum as he screeched profanities. He grabbed the man by the scruff, stood him up, then took him from the room and from my nightmare. The nurse then re-entered and punched in the key sequence to shut down the machine's alarm, and left without a word or a glance. I didn't sleep that night, and my alarm went off several more times, bringing a grin to my face through the still searing pain that every breath or muscle spasm brought. That morning, they said, "This will hurt a little," and popped out the chest tube, slapped on a bandage, and sent me on my way. As I was leaving, I asked the morning nurse staff about the man's situation. None of them had any idea who or what I was talking about, as the night nurse had apparently deemed my experience as unworthy of even a mention to the changing shift. Public hospitals scare the crap out of me now. Living in 2 haunted houses in my teens, Part 1. These experiences are from my teen years growing up in a decent suburb at the time in Northern California. I was never a believer or disbeliever in ghosts. I was a kid, but experiencing what I did definitely made me a believer. I've never told my experiences to my friends or family, but I wanted to share it with you guys here. We moved into our new home in 2003. I was about 12 at the time. For the first few years, everything seemed completely normal. I had friends on my street, and everything was pretty fair. Everybody just was growing up. 4 years later, my little brother was born in 2007. This was probably my first experience with any type of paranormal or such. My mom had a baby monitor upstairs in her room next to his crib, and she had left it on one Saturday morning as we all went down for breakfast. We were all at the table eating when suddenly we hear a baby crying from the monitor speaker in the kitchen. But it sounded exactly like my brother's cry. But he was at the table with us. So we go up to the room and check. Nothing. We unplugged the monitor, and all were shocked at how the cry was so similar. None of our neighbors had any babies, and our windows weren't open, so we never figured out what caused that to happen. As time went by, my mom would wake up and hear spoons clinging on plates, as if someone was eating cereal or something. And she'd call downstairs for anyone, but we'd all be asleep. My sister would wake up and feel weight on the foot of her bed, as if someone sat on her bed. We all started to see and hear things closer to 2008 and 2009. We all knew, but honestly, we weren't as afraid as one would think. One night, as my mom woke to feed my brother, she saw an entity in the corner of her room. But as she looked up, she said it had dashed super fast into the closet. And she woke up my dad to go check and didn't find anyone there. She explained it as a topless male. She couldn't make out a face. She thought it was me. But definitely wasn't me. But she said it was super fast. She could only make up a male figure with no shirt on. One night, my sister woke up terrified to a dream she had, where she explained a man with a white face was following her, and she awoke. She had a window in her room that overlooked our cross street, because we lived in a corner house, and she said when she awoke, she looked out the window and saw the same man in her dream walking across the street, away from our home, looking up at her. She said it was like he was leaving from our house. She was beyond terrified and hysterical. But now looking back, my parents didn't question her, just tried to comfort her. In 2008, due to the market crash, we lost the house and moved next door. Literally. The neighbor next to us rented us their home. And there's where things got more freaky for me personally. Living in Two Haunted Houses, Part 2. I'll also retouch some of my experiences in my first home now that I'm on my computer. Just to go over really quick, my first home we experienced baby noises from my brother's baby monitor upstairs while we were all downstairs in the kitchen. We would hear plates and spoons in the kitchen as if someone was eating. My mom woke to see a male figure in her room, and my sister had a dream of a man with a white face, to awake to see the man walking away from our home outside. Yeah, it's crazy, but when we lost our home in 2008, we moved next door. This is where I saw most of these unexplained happenings. Once we moved into our neighbor's home next door to our old house, right away we just felt this uneasy energy. The home just felt dark, even with all the curtains open. Here, I felt as if I was being watched. Here, I'd be up at night playing Xbox when I would hear my door creak, and I would look at my door and see the knob turn and my door slowly open. No one there. I brushed it off and was not too spooked or thought too much of it. There would be times I would go downstairs and eat and come up to my TV and Xbox completely off when I had left it on. My dad would be up at night watching TV and would say he'd hear someone upstairs bouncing. What he said sounded like a ball against the walls, very loud. It was strange. By this time, my sister had moved out, so it was just my brother and parents. My brother's room was right next to mine. He was about 1 at the time. There would be nights I would be up and hear him tossing and turning in his crib pretty loud. And I would check on him, and he would be asleep, not moving. And the next morning, he would have thin scratches on his behind. Red, long, thin scratches. He would often say, "Cookie Monster," and would sound terrified to be in his room. On a Saturday morning, I walked out of my room and turned to look into his room. He had a rocking horse in the room, and it was rocking on its own, pretty strong. This was my first up-and-close personal experience. I stood and watched it continue to rock, not seeming to slow down. I kicked it and it stopped. I told my mom about it, and she said no one had been in his room. She was making breakfast downstairs. I was shocked and confused, but not scared, if that makes sense. The house had hardwood floor, and I would continue to hear footsteps outside my room. Stuff moved around, strong, eerie feelings. I just felt always watched, like I was not alone when I would be home alone sometimes. We moved out of the house in 2012, and when we were moving late at night, it would be super uncomfortable and scary late at night. I would go with my mom around 9 or 10 to grab some stuff, and we would both be scared as if someone was there with us. We both felt that energy. When my dad turned the key to the owner, he asked if he had ever heard anything about the house. And the neighbor looked at my dad and said, "Yep, my daughter is terrified of her room," which was my brother's room, the same room he was terrified. And now it made sense. That house carried an energy. I'm not sure if it's the land, as our first house next door also had some unexplained occurrences, but I was shocked. We moved to another area of town, and that was it. No more paranormal experiences. I still cannot explain how or what caused what we saw and heard. That's why I truly believe in some sort of afterlife, or at least ghosts or entities. I get goosebumps every time I talk about these stories. Friend's haunted house. First occurrence. In the early 2000s, I spent a lot of time at one of my best friend's houses. We'll call him Kurt. We would work out in his basement, garage, and hang out in the bungalow-style second floor. There was about 5 of us who would regularly hang out there. One weekend, Kurt was out of town, and he gave us the green light to go work out in his basement. While my buddy Mike and I were starting to rotate on heavy bag and jump rope, we both had this very strange feeling of being watched, and the energy of the room became very dense and thick. It all seemed to be coming from this corner of the room. We both acknowledged how weird it felt, but continued. This lasted about 2 minutes before both of our arms started to burn on the exact same spots right above our elbows. We both had these large red areas that were absolutely on fire. Nothing made any sense because we didn't have anything come into contact with them. We immediately left the house, and as soon as we did, our arms returned to normal. The redness was gone and the burning sensation subsided. Second occurrence. Back at Kurt's house with a couple of us hanging out with him and his 4-year-old daughter. Kurt had to run and pick up his wife, and we were babysitting while he took off. We all were on the second floor hanging out and playing games with this kid. She randomly got up and walked downstairs without saying anything. My buddy Mike and I didn't really think anything of it until we heard her talking to someone, and it sounded like she was answering questions. I got up to go look over the railing, and she was above the stairs, and I was seeing if I could spot her. It sounded like she was still at the bottom of the stairs. That's when I saw a very distinct softball-sized white orb floating up the stairs. And as I was watching this thing, totally shocked, it ascended rapidly, made a 90-degree turn, and went right through my leg. As this happened, I reactively tried to jump out of the way but couldn't avoid it. I immediately turned to my buddy Mike and asked, "Did you see that?" He looked hilariously confused, and the expression, "You look how I feel," came out. We couldn't believe what the hell just happened. My leg felt strange and warm, but not painful at all. We came downstairs and waited for Kurt to get back. As soon as he did, we told the story, and also talked about the burning arms incident. He was dumbfounded and told us he never experienced anything like that in the house. Wondering if it never presented itself to him, or was Kurt just blind to it all? After that, we were never there without Kurt again, and never experienced anything else. One of a handful of paranormal experiences. This instance occurred in northern Michigan at an old hunting cabin that my dad and uncles leased for about 5 years. The cabin belonged to an old couple before they started leasing it. The husband passed away, and the wife decided to put it on the market. It was on about 300 acres of land in the middle of absolutely nowhere. This was a pretty large home with 5 rooms that had at least 2 twin beds in each room, with the exception of the couple's bedroom, which was always locked. Kinda creepy, but never thought anything of it. The house was still furnished with all their belongings as well. There was one main living room with a tiny little TV that got one Canadian station that would air the red-green show. This trip in particular was my dad, myself, and my brother. They decided to go to sleep, and I stayed up to watch that goofy red-green show. Important fact was that all the windows were closed and the heat was off. No possibility of a breeze or wind blowing in from any window or vent. On the wall of the TV, there is a hat that belonged to the husband, who again was deceased. As I was watching the show, the hat began to wobble, and once I noticed it moving, it levitated off the wall horizontally and floated to the chair that was below it. I mean that in every sense of the word. It floated slowly down to the chair. I immediately turned the TV off and hauled ass to bed. My dad and brother were fast asleep, and my bed was right next to a window. As I lay there, totally confused and freaked out, I had this very eerie feeling that made me look out the window. This window faced the backyard, and when I looked, I saw a very unmistakable white apparition floating or gliding across the backyard. This made me roll back over and cover my head with my sleeping bag until I eventually fell asleep. I tried to find a logical explanation for the hat, but it was impossible. If you can imagine a cowboy-style hat remove itself from a wall fixture and float and wobble down to a chair in a very slow and deliberate manner, that's exactly what happened. I never sensed any malice or negativity, but it was the weirdest damn experience. My parents moved to a house built in the late 1800s. I've never felt comfortable there, just like I was being watched. A few times I swear a ghost was in my bedroom sitting on my chest. I couldn't get up, I couldn't move, I was just stuck, paralyzed. Then it moved, and I'm able to move again, and I see an orb float off into the wall. After I moved out, my wife and I would visit with our kids, infants at the time, and they would often quote-unquote zone out and stare at the wall like they were watching something or someone. I heard a story from my mom that when they were cleaning the basement out, she came across a jar that appeared to be filled with wire haphazardly stuffed in it. Upon closer inspection, it was bird bones. All the flesh had rotten off, and the feathers had fallen off and left the bones in the said jar. We had an apartment we rented above the detached garage. One day, the renter suddenly moved out. Later, I learned that she had a similar ghost experience as I did. She was sleeping on the couch and was woken up but unable to move, but could hear something screaming at her. At a whisper volume, "Get out of here, get out. I'm gonna kill you if you don't leave, get out." Needless to say, she was out. My parents ended up divorcing, and my mom stayed in the house. She ended up with lung cancer. Fuck cancer, she died at 55, and everyone agrees that she was still beautiful. My grandmother came out came over from the UK to stay with her. Really long story short, she was walking up the stairs and fell and broke her right wrist. She swore up and down that something pushed her. 6 months later, she broke the other wrist under nearly the same circumstances, just a different flight of stairs. I was at a horse show at some point and met a woman who knew the previous owner. We chatted a while, and she asked out of the blue if I had met Delilah yet. I asked who that was, and she wouldn't go into more detail about it. There are other, unexplainable events that happened in that house. My mom used to see spirits in the corner of her eye, an old man, walking and reading a book. She could never see him directly, and she couldn't say if he even had legs. Ask Reddit. I lived across the street from my high school, and my friends would frequently stay over and walk to school the next morning with me. Our basement was somewhat unfinished, and somewhat finished, and I had my bedroom, a living room area, and a bathroom. One night while sleeping, I heard my name whispered while I was dreaming. I didn't wake up immediately, but it got my attention. Happens a few times more, and it finally woke me up. It sounded like my dad, so I thought he was trying to wake me up, and I let out a groggy, "What?" Nothing but silence. I didn't look around the room because I had this intense fear wash over me. All the hair on my neck was standing up, and I really felt like someone was in the room. I just stared at the wall that my bed was against and waited for morning to come. I didn't mention it to anyone and brushed it off as just a strange dream. Sometime later, maybe a month, my friend was visiting and had fallen asleep on my bed. And he fell asleep watching TV. I let him have it, and I slept on the couch in the upstairs living room. The next day, he tells me about a voice that woke him up whispering my name. He claims to have seen some luminous figure in the corner of my room. To this day, we both get freaked out if I imitate the voice. I sound a lot like my dad. I don't know what it actually was. Coincidental shared imagination seems highly unlikely. It wasn't my dad. The little girl on the phone. A few years ago, I was awoken on Sunday morning by a phone call. It was a little girl, I'd guess around 4 years old. "Morning, Granddad." I laughed. She sounded sweet, and then gently explained to her that she dialed the wrong number. "Oh," she said before hanging up. A few minutes later, the phone rings again. "Morning, Granddad." I laughed again and apologetically told her that she dialed the wrong number again. "Are you coming, Granddad? What time are you coming? Hurry up, we're about to get started." She was absolutely bursting with joy, and whoever her granddad was obviously a very lucky guy. It sounded like there was a birthday party or something going on. Still laughing, I tried to explain her mistake to her and said that obviously I'm not her granddad, before saying bye and hanging up the phone. I lay in bed laughing. A minute later, the phone rings. "Morning, Granddad." For the third time, I explained I'm not her granddad. "You are my granddad, silly," she said with a funny tone. She thought I was her granddad playing a trick on her, and she thought it was funny. Again, I explained that I'm not her granddad, at which point she drops the phone and runs off into the background. I could hear her in the background saying, "Dad, Granddad's playing tricks and won't talk to me." I could hear that she was getting slightly upset at this point. Then a man picks up the phone. "Dad, is everything okay?" the man says. So I, still finding this whole thing funny, Explained to the man that his daughter had simply dialed the wrong number a few times and it's all a big misunderstanding. Then he says in a concerned tone, "Okay, Dad, are you at home? Stay where you are, we're coming our way over." Now he thinks I'm his dad. So again, not laughing anymore, I explain that I'm not who he thinks I am, and that it's just the wrong number. What he said next scared the shit out of me. He said, my name, "I'm really worried. We'll be over in 15 minutes. Don't move." At that point, I just hung up the phone and lay in bed wondering what the fuck was happening. They never called back, and I assumed I'd just been pranked by a friend or something. Over the next few days, I asked everybody I knew to own up to the prank. Everybody swore blind that it wasn't them. Not only was this girl convinced that I was her granddad, but the man also thought I was his dad, and also said my actual first name. Obvious coincidences happen, but this was just weird. So a few days later, still puzzled, I thought I'd just ring the number back and see who answered. The number wasn't in use. I just got a dead tone. Weird, huh? I think I was called by a grandkid in a parallel universe or something. And judging by the sound of her voice, the parallel me was one lucky guy